After years of impassioned debate, an interstate expansion project is about to begin. We'll talk with the man leading it. The state moves forward to outsource one aspect of medical marijuana. Backers of one proposed constitutional amendment get more time to gather signatures, and some indicators suggest a slowing of the economy. Arkansas Week is just ahead.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
And welcome to Arkansas Week. I'm Michael Heplin, News Director of KUAR Public Radio. I'll be sitting in for Steve Barnes this week. After 4 years of very impassioned debate, heated debate, today, Friday, is the deadline for public comments to be received on the environmental report about the proposed 30 Crossings project. This would be a major expansion of Interstate 30 through the downtowns of Little Rock and North Little Rock. Joining me to discuss this is Ben Browning. He is the 30 Crossing Project Director. Sir, thank you for coming by to talk with me about this.
My pleasure.
What has gone into preparing for this? Obviously, this is a huge project, a lot of money, a lot of people very upset about this, the potential for litigation. How do you go about something this massive?
Sure. Well, this particular corridor has been looked at for over a decade. But we've really been looking at it actively since April of 2014, starting with a planning study. Really looked at what we call a universe of alternatives. What are all the possibilities of ways that we can address the recurring issues on this particular corridor? And they are the congestion, but also just the age of the facility. Both the roadway and the bridges are 50 to 60 years old and in need of replacement. We've been rehabbing them for a long time, but just time to replace it. So we started with that planning, and as we moved through that planning process, we identified what we called reasonable and feasible alternatives and took those into the environmental process we've been looking at today. So for about the last 2 years, we've been evaluating all of the possible environmental impacts of the alternatives we've identified to solve the problems that we've identified in the corridor.
And what are the environmental impacts this will have?
So right now we're looking at, we're not showing any significant impacts, and that's kind of the difference in an environmental assessment and an environmental impact study. So environmental assessment looks at the corridor and says, will it have anything significant impacting the environment around the communities, the watershed, the air quality, the noise, different things like that, a significant impact. And the environmental assessment looks to see, are there significant? If not, we're able to go forward what we call a finding of no significant impact. And right now, that's what we're proposing to the Federal Highway Administration. We've looked at all of those things: hazardous materials, impacts to the community, cumulative effects of other projects, air quality, noise, and through all that very exhaustive study, we found that although there are minor impacts from the project, nothing significant.
This is 6 lanes right now. Visually describe for our viewers what is being proposed at this point.
Sure. So throughout the entire corridor, which starts at the south at what we call South Terminal, I-530, I-440, and I-30, going north through Little Rock, replacing the Arkansas River Bridge, continuing through North Little Rock to the intersection with I-40, and then to the east with the intersection of Highway 67. So right now, as you mentioned, 3 lanes in each direction. We're proposing adding an additional 2 lanes in each direction. And those lanes really are for the purpose of separating the traffic that's trying to go through the corridor from the traffic that's coming on and off throughout that corridor. One thing unique about the 30 Crossing project is that it's really a string of intersections. It's not a through interstate corridor. There are 6 major intersections in a 7-mile stretch. And so you have a lot of merging and weaving, and that really causes a lot of the problems we see on the corridor right now. The traffic incidents existing on 30 Crossing are 3 times that of a similar facility, interstate facility. And so a lot of that is because of the inadequacy in traffic being able to merge and weave with the through traffic. So those outside 2 lanes will be added to allow traffic to get on and off more safely. They'll ultimately tie into what we call a collector-distributor system at the Arkansas River Bridge. And what that means is that the center 3 lanes will be barrier separated from an outside 2 lanes, and that the outside 2 lanes are really meant for the traffic that's coming on from Broadway or wanting to get off in Little Rock or vice versa going northbound will be able to separate themselves from the through traffic. And so what we saw in our traffic modeling when we put those 2 additional lanes and then separate them by that collector-distributor system at the River Bridge is the traffic does segregate itself, and you see much less conflict between your through traffic and your merging and weaving traffic.
This is a drastic expansion of the interstate. Why was the decision made to do it all here on I-30? There had been other options considered, maybe building a bridge near where Chester is in Little Rock, perhaps moving traffic elsewhere, I-440. Why was the decision made to do it all here?
Sure. So we did a lot of study, traffic modeling from a regional standpoint and also in the corridor. And we've shown that if you did a Chester Street Bridge, it would only move around 3% of the traffic off of Interstate 30. Most of the traffic that is using Interstate 30 is destined to somewhere on that corridor. Over 80% of the traffic is actually going somewhere on that corridor. And so alternate routes really are not reasonable for the traffic. I-440, those who would use I-440 already are. It's signed for those who are seeking to bypass downtown Little Rock, and most of the traffic that wants to bypass already is using it. We saw if you built a Chester Street Bridge, most of the traffic, it would pull it off of Broadway and Main rather than Interstate 30. And so we just saw through that traffic that we really needed to improve this particular corridor so it could work better in conjunction with the other options that are available.
You've had a long series of public meetings about this. People have given a lot of comments.
Absolutely.
In the minds of some people, the department has already made up its mind.
So through the whole process, as I mentioned before, 4 years. So we've been looking at it for 4 years, and you're correct, some people have said we had already decided expansion was the answer at the beginning. Well, when you look at it, it's very obvious that you do not have the capacity on Interstate 30 right now to handle not only the traffic, but all the complicated movements of that traffic. And so from the beginning, we understood that to solve many of the problems, you're going to have capacity improvements. And so we hadn't predetermined that that was the solution, but we understood that in trying to solve the issues between the intersections, some capacity would most likely be necessary. The scope and scale of that was not understood until we went further through the study process. But as we went through, we realized that because of all the interchanges and the movement between them, the additional 2 lanes really provides that weaving distance necessary. Now, a lot of them say there's no need for 5 lanes in Little Rock in each direction for an interstate going through. I completely agree with that. If this was only a through interstate, there would be no need for 5 lanes in each direction. But because of all the intersections that are interacting with each other, you need that extra space to allow that traffic to make its decision between the interchanges.
There's so much technologically happening these days with self-driving cars, the promise that we could eventually be at a point where cars would be somewhat automated. You could have a tighter density, concentration of vehicles on roadways. Why not wait, say, 5 years and see where technology is, and if you can have more vehicles put together that are working together?
Sure, and we've actually done a study to look at autonomous vehicles, and unfortunately right now nobody really knows what that's going to look like. And to get the benefits a lot of people are talking to you about, you have to have almost 100% saturation of autonomous vehicles before you can really start to use the higher densities, because if you throw one driver in with autonomous vehicles, then you have issues related to that. And so the industry, as far as the highway industry, is still waiting to see really what that direction is. Now, one thing, nothing that we've proposed would be in conflict with any of that. At the worst case, we would have extra capacity in the future. But as far as waiting, they anticipate it's probably going to be more than 5 years before we can really start to develop policy. But we actually have a very unique situation here. We have a funding package that will not be there forever. It's a very unique funding package, was developed from the half-cent sales tax as well as combining some federal funds. And so to wait 5 years, that money would probably not be available. And also there are very significant structural issues with that particular corridor that need to be addressed now, and waiting longer would just compound that and actually make the project more expensive.
In recent years, downtown Little Rock has been developed greatly. You have a lot of now people living very close to the interstate who are very unnerved by this. There will be more exhaust from vehicles, more noise. You can see why so many people are concerned.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, and that's the whole part of the environmental assessment. And we're hoping that people will look at it. When it comes to the exhaust, we've actually shown that air quality will be improved by this project over if we do not do it. And that really, there's complicated aspects of air quality, but moving traffic actually emits less emissions than stopped and congested traffic. We're also showing that EPA regulation is going to improve air quality in the future just by, as the existing fleet is replaced with newer vehicles, it's just going to bring that down across the board. And so we're seeing in our air quality analysis that in the future air quality will actually be improved in the area. Not directly just by the project, but also by EPA. And then also with noise, we've done noise evaluation, determined where barriers would be necessary, and we'll be approaching different neighborhoods in the vicinity of the project to ask them if they want a barrier, because our policy says if we've identified a barrier as reasonable and feasible, we'll go to that community and say, do you want a barrier? And we will construct it as part of the project.
The Department of Transportation does expect, or at least has been preparing for the potential for litigation. And this past week we saw litigation related to the I-630 expansion. Talk about how the department has prepared this in a way to be ready for any kind of challenge.
Sure, the legal challenge will be on the process that was followed for the environmental assessment. And so we've just made sure that we follow the process. It's a very well-defined federal process you go through when you're clearing a project environmentally. And so we feel very confident that we've done a very extensive and exhaustive environmental study, looked at all aspects of the project, documented it, provided the data to support it. And so it's just making sure that we've done all the work necessary to ensure that this project will not have a significant impact.
Finally, this is a 4,000-page document, this environmental report, and you've gotten how many comments? Thousands, safe to say?
So to date on this one, as you mentioned, we've had 6 other public meetings and we've received several thousand comments on those. For this particular environmental assessment, last time I received an update, it was just under 300.
Okay, how do you respond to those people?
Sure, well, we will address every single comment, and in writing we will look at that and respond to the concerns that they have, and that will be in writing and produced in a report. We won't be responding individually to each person, but we will post responses to all questions on our website, 30crossing.com, once they're available and approved by Federal Highways. But the main part is we will address the comments, and they will become part of the environmental document before it's approved by the Federal Highway Administration.
Ben Browning is 30 Crossing Project Director. Thanks for coming by to talk with me.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back. And we're back with our roundtable. Joining me to expand on this project here is Wes Brown, a reporter for Talk Business and Politics, and Ernie Dumas, an independent journalist and columnist. At first, to either of you, these kind of interstate projects drastically have changed the downtowns across the country. You've seen this in many cases. What's the assessment of what kind of impact this widening of Interstate 30 will have for Little Rock and North Little Rock?
Well, obviously, I think it'll have a huge impact. A project of this magnitude, I think it's going to be something like $600 million.
$625 million.
And ultimately, we all know that it'll be far more than that, because once you even built the built-in inflation in those costs, because this is going to take some years to do. Beyond that, that's going to force widening of other parts of 630, other parts of 630, and other parts. So ultimately, it's going to be a huge project, and it'll have a huge environmental impact, although perhaps not as damaging as a lot of the opponents say, but perhaps a lot more damaging than the Highway Department and the Bureau of Public Roads will say. So it's going to be a big impact. And there's also something else going on around the country now. A lot of cities like Houston and Dallas and Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Atlanta, and others that have gone through these constant, huge interstate building projects to relieve congestion, and it just always results in more congestion. So there is a revisiting of that whole concept of addressing congestion by wider and wider thoroughfares. So that will be one of the issues, I think, that a lot of the the opponents will be raising in this particular case. And this is going to go on and on. Today is the deadline for people to respond to the environmental assessment, which is a lower threshold of analysis that the highway department has to go through for these major projects. But there's some good case law that says that there is a strong likelihood that they will have to do a much larger, a more definitive analysis of the environmental and traffic impact of this than what they have already done. As we were talking about before we go on the air, there was a case in Little Rock back about 25 years ago, in which the city of Little Rock wanted to build, expand Rebsamen Park Road, which is a little road that runs alongside the river, Arkansas River. There was a dispute over that. The city was going to build this little 2-lane road connecting downtown all the way out to the Interstate 430 west of Little Rock. It went to court, and the federal judge and also the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals said that the impact of this little narrow road was significant enough that they were going to have to do the full environmental impact statement rather than simply an environmental assessment. So that's some case law that they'll have to address when this gets, and there will be a lawsuit over this. You can be sure about.
Yeah, and this is something that's going to be with us for a long time. If you look at Mr. Browning mentioned the website. I would encourage people to go to that website. A lot of information. There's actually a video of the plans, especially going across the Arkansas River from Little Rock to North Little Rock. Very interesting. It'll kind of give you an idea, a visual of what it looks like. Just amazing. A lot of times when I drive south down to Florida, you can see these kind of projects in major cities across the South where you see these massive projects. And as Ernie said, I know one thing about them: while they're going on, there's going to be a lot of congestion. It's going to be a lot of, but the larger issue, and it's going to affect you're going to see this discussed during the mayor's race in Little Rock, is the community issue, the environmental assessment. It states that, what is the community impact? I think, and Mr. Browning said there was some minor issues with that, but I think that's going to be the major issue that comes up when you get into the political side of it and the discussion of this. People in the communities are going to be affected during construction, which is going to be a huge deal, and after all of this is over with. Well,
speaking of the division in the community now, it's true that all the major public players in this project, the city manager board of Little Rock, the Little Rock Chamber of Commerce, both of them have supported this project in its current design, and the Metroplan, the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, has endorsed it. Although that is a group made up primarily of suburban outlying towns and cities. This particular project, the genesis of it is the people who are living and are working in Little Rock and North Little Rock, but commute to Conway, Greenbrier, Bryant, Benton, Cabot, or all these other cities. They're the ones that face this congestion every day when they come to work in Little Rock or North Little Rock, and when they leave in the late afternoon. So the 2 drive time periods each day, it's when you have this heavy congestion. And this project primarily benefits those people. And it will be up to 14 lanes wide. That's 14 lanes wide, cutting through downtown Little Rock and North Little Rock. So that's a huge expanse of concrete. Now they have done a good job. It's a beautifully designed thing to allow traffic to merge, and that's the object of it. All these people, commuters, to allow them to merge safely and get home faster and get to work a little faster.
Yeah, but we do need to roll on. But before, it is worth mentioning that the expansion of a 2-mile stretch of I-630 started this week. We had a federal court hearing, and a judge refused to issue a temporary restraining order to halt construction.
So construction goes on.
Yeah, so the first of 3 overpasses was torn down this week to accommodate the larger width of that interstate. But Wes, we had a rather contentious sounding hearing with the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Commission this week. You were there as they went forward with plans approved last week to use an outside contractor to score dispensary.
Yeah, there were 2 issues in this. One was to hire an outside consultant. The state procurement officers are going to come in, and probably by next week we're going to put out bids for to hire a consultant to come in and score, and then they'll hand it back over to the 5-person state medical marijuana commission to make a decision. I guess the bottom line is that it's expected by the end of this year to have these 220 dispensaries or pharmacies, the pot pharmacies scored, and then by the first of the year, supposedly we're supposed to have seed in the ground from the cultivation centers, and by mid-2019, maybe the medical marijuana industry will be up and running, maybe, or not.
But you had some concern from at least one of the commissioners who said this isn't how the process was supposed to happen.
Right. I think, and that Commissioner Travis Story, he believes that the commission under the Constitution is supposed to make that decision, not farm it out to a consultant. So, and also they threw out some of the applications, 13 applications from some runner-up cultivation centers, and we could also see some legal kickback from that. So this could postpone it again, and so this is going to be interesting to see how it moves forward, and if it goes smoothly or we continue this stop and go.
Yeah, and this Arkansas was the first state in this part of the country in the South to approve medical marijuana, but we're really behind other states now.
Well,
with
Louisiana has kind of a hybrid model that they're going to be up and running by, I think, by September. There's some other states. Oklahoma just approved a referendum. I think the surrounding states, Missouri, Mississippi, and Texas, Tennessee all have referendums where they're going to voters are going to get a chance to approve medical marijuana.
Okay. Voters, or at least backers of a proposed constitutional amendment for casinos, got some more time. Apparently they submitted enough to get a 30-day extension.
Yeah, and it, I guess the question is, to get these things on the November ballot, do you have enough time to educate the voters about what these proposed constitutional amendments mean? And I, as a voter myself, sometimes it's very difficult to understand what some of these ballot items is saying, whether I'm going to...
You may not want to educate voters too much about it. That's the other strategy.
Exactly right.
Yeah. On the financial front, there are some indicators that we're seeing some slowdown of the economy, and Ernie, impacts of tax cuts.
Well, that's true. The impact of tax cuts, they're minor tax cuts in Arkansas tax cuts, but the major tax cut, of course, was the federal tax cut of December of a year ago, where they cut the top corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, and also gave some major tax concessions to upper income, principally various forms of businesses. So, and that tax cut was supposed to stimulate the economy, and including Arkansas. And there's some evidence that there's been some stimulus. But in Arkansas, I think we have some kind of discouraging figures about economic growth in Arkansas, particularly this past week. Generally, of course, the country's doing very well. We're in the 9th year of a consistent expansion. That's almost unprecedented. We've had 9 straight years of economic growth and job growth, and that includes Arkansas as well. And in fact, we're very proud that in Arkansas the last couple of years that our unemployment rate is even slightly lower than the federal rate. But if you look at the figures that have come out lately, it shows that generally economic growth in Arkansas is lagging way behind the rest of the country. That our unemployment rate has inched up just slightly, but it's really kind of almost immaterial. The little slight increase from 3.7 to 3.8%. We're still behind national. But our gross domestic product, which is a measurement of our economic growth, shows that in the last, since 2014, the last nearly 5 years now, we have lagged
well behind the rest.
Far behind the rest of the country. In fact, we're next to last in economic growth. That I think over that almost 5-year period, Arkansas's economic growth averaged 1% a year. Nationally, it averaged 2.4% a year. So that's actually pretty discouraging. And you can see it, the aspects of it, in other ways. For example, in the paper this morning, we had the story about the college-going rate of high school youngsters in Arkansas is falling, has been falling the last few years, which I think is a measurement of our economic well-being. Tuition rates have been going up at all the institutions in Arkansas because the state is not providing as much money. So we're seeing that in a lot of different ways.
Okay.
Yeah, and and to the Trump administration credit, that GDP nationally came out this morning 4.1%, which shows that the widening gap, as Ernie alluded to, between Arkansas and the rest of the nation.
All right, Wes Brown, Ernie Dumas, I'm Michael Heplin. Thanks for joining us this week for Arkansas Week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.